Hey everybody, how's it going? In just a second, I will play the full series review for Waterloo Road, but I also wanted to share something with you guys. I am the host of BlackBoxOnlineRadio, a true crime channel here on YouTube, and it covers serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, true crime psychology, but in all reality, any subject is fair game. So there's an open invitation to go over to that channel, check it out if you're curious about that stuff, and I'm the author of the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DeHaan, which is available on Amazon.com. So feel free to have a look at the description box. There's a lot of stuff there. And remember, being weird is not a crime. And of course, AstroPsych 400. Okay, now let's play the review. Well, hello all, and welcome to the AstroPsych 400 channel. This channel has been mostly devoted to a 12-part series on the astrological signs, which you can see here, but I wanted to talk about something that was also on my mind, and that was the show Waterloo Road. I just completed this series, and it's much older, but I started Waterloo Road in kind of a different way. I first began watching the show back in 2006 because it was on BBC America. I was obsessed with BBC America, and I was in high school at the time, a senior in high school to be precise, and I was the only person watching BBC America in the entire school. Like, no one else was watched any of these shows. I had nobody to talk about them with, and definitely contributed to my alienation. But I watched season 1, and it ended with a very particular cliffhanger that I remembered very vividly, and I picked up again 15 years later at the end of 2020, and I watched it on and off during 2021, finishing it up in the month of August, which is at the time of this recording, August 2021. In that 15-year gap, I only remembered maybe 4 characters. I remembered that the headmaster from season 1, or head teacher, I guess they call him, was named Jack Rimmer, because it sounds like Jack the Rimmer, and he had an adversary named Lewis Sutton, although I didn't know that at the time. I thought the whole time his name was Lewis Sutton. I guess my American West Virginian ears don't pick up on all of the British charm. But they had Jack the Rimmer and Lewis Sutton, and then there was also a boy named Dante, and for some reason in my memory I thought his name was Dante Hicks, but that's not true. His name is Dante Charles. Dante Hicks is actually the cashier in the movie Clerks, and of course Clerks 2, and the actor who plays Dante Hicks in Clerks appears in other Kevin Smith movies as Dante's cousins, like Gil Hicks is the name of the character in Mallrats. But to get away from that, so there was this guy named Dante Charles, and of course Lorna was the name of the woman who was involved with the cliffhanger that I just mentioned. For 15 years, I was always curious, what happened to her at the end of Series 1? And yes, if you're listening to this full series review, this will contain numerous spoilers, but I'm sure if you've found your way to this corner of YouTube, you have some familiarity with Waterloo Road, and maybe you've watched this series too, so yeah, we're going to talk about things that would be spoilers. Lorna attempts suicide at the end of Series 1 by jumping into a canal, and I just moved away and went to college like many Americans do at the age of 18, and I was always curious what happened with Waterloo Road, and I decided to get back into it in 2020, and I had no idea that it was such a big series that was going on for 10 seasons. Well, the fact of the matter is that there are numerous characters that were connected to Lorna Clarkson at the time. Then she changes her name back to Lorna Dickey because she was involved in a love triangle with someone named Tom Clarkson, who was her husband, as well as her best friend Izzy Redpath. Now, even though Tom Clarkson would go on to become perhaps the most well-loved character on the entire show, I had no memory of him at all. I vaguely remember him saying something to Lorna in this advertisement for Waterloo Road when he says life goes on, and she says, well, that's great for you, Tom, because they played that commercial over and over again on BBC America to promote Waterloo Road. But I think Waterloo Road was meant to explore a lot of the gray areas in life, as well as just being a primetime soap. I mean, it's about playing to your emotions, but also recognizing that life is complicated, because you have this dynamic where Tom Clarkson is married to Lorna Dickey, her maiden name, and then they have this conflict of feelings, and he wants to move on and be with somebody else, but he's already married to her. And this would be later recreated through a love triangle that would involve, as I said, Dante Charles, not Dante Hicks, and his young wife, Chloe Granger, along with a new character that was brought in for the second season, Brett Aspinall. Brett Aspinall was played by Tom Payne, who would go on to be on the show Prodigal Son. But with the romance between Dante Charles and Chloe Granger, you see a different set of conflicting emotions, because they're teenagers and they decide to get married in high school. And for once, I was actually on board with it almost every time they have that discussion where they want to have teenagers getting married. I don't find it entertaining. I think it's boring. I think it's unattractive. I think that it's unrealistic. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's just unfair to the characters, even though they are fictional characters. But with Dante Charles and Chloe Granger, that was one of the only times when I was like, okay, I can see why these two want to get married. And that is because they already spend all their time together. They're obviously very committed to each other. At first, why not certify their union with a marriage, which is what they end up doing. But this is after many events have already taken place. Izzy Redpath is no longer in the picture. She was murdered, and Tom Clarkson ends up being the foster father to, or stepfather, foster father, something like that, to Izzy's two daughters, Chloe Granger and Mika Granger. Now, I said that Mika had a boyfriend named Brett Aspinall, who then goes on to get involved with a love affair with Chloe Granger, and in short, she cheats on her young husband, Dante Charles. Now, this is one of the times when I just have to play the card. The actors' natural charisma and charm really contributed to the show Waterloo Road, and I'm thinking very precisely about Chloe and Dante, because many times throughout the early seasons, I was thinking that these characters could have been portrayed as very dark, very menacing, maybe even malicious, or definitely cold and calculating. But because of the likability that I think the actors possess, it's done in such a warm way. But even that love triangle I mentioned involving Chloe, Brett, and Dante really led me to get the impression that, well, it was difficult to like Chloe Granger as much as I used to, because in short, she cheated on her husband with her sister's boyfriend because she just felt overwhelmed with everything. And then there's this one scene where she just gets on a train and decides to run away, and she just gives a sigh of relief, and you can almost see the actress Katie just like giving a short, gentle smile. Well, it's okay now. She just sort of destroyed everyone's life and was moving on. And as I said, it's meant to show the gray areas of life, and that Chloe was recreating certain behaviors of Tom Clarkson, her stepdad slash foster dad, especially after the passing of her murdered mother, Izzy Redpath. And I should also mention that Lorna, who was also involved in that previous love triangle, I believe she committed suicide actually after she had been diagnosed with MS. It was an overdose, but it's many months ago since I saw that particular episode. So you have this dynamic that is going on, lots of love triangles, and this would also be recreated involving Mika's boyfriend Brett Aspinall with the school Secca, for lack of a better term, named Davina Shackleton, and the head teacher Jack Rimmer. Davina Shackleton and Brett had a previous sexual encounter, but then Davina goes on to develop a relationship with the head teacher, Jack Rimmer, and then there's these conflicting emotions, and people have dark secrets that they don't want to get out. And I think that that's one of the key things we have to remember from Waterloo Road, that your emotions are real, and you're going to have to battle them. And sometimes you're going to have emotions for different people. But I remember, like, I was watching so much Waterloo Road, like, back in January and February of 2020 that I even had a dream when I was just talking to somebody. I don't even remember who, but I was discussing the show with them, and I was just like, who do you like more, Mika Granger or Chloe Granger? And we both said in unison at the same time, Chloe. But I really do think that is because of the actor's natural just likability, or they wanted to portray them as gentle and loving characters. But you also see something that is called the lover-provider dynamic, whereas Chloe is very much attracted to Brett Aspinall because he is a person who is exciting, and he is the lover that gives her a certain sense of satisfaction where she can always blame him for the infidelity. Well, he seduced me. And then the provider would, of course, be Dante Charles, who is the one who wants to give a lot of attention and resources. And that's the way that I would describe Dante Charles. Like, what adjective would you use to describe him? Passionate. Passionate about whom? He's passionate about his young wife, Chloe. And of course, he's ambitious, and this would go on to later be recreated in the scenes where Chloe gets pregnant, even though they are married. But she says she wants to give up the baby for adoption because Chloe is thinking that Dante doesn't live in the real world, or that he isn't completely well grounded. He has lots of wild business ideas that never work, get rich quick schemes, and they are all unsuccessful. She simply thinks that she's not ready to be a mother. She wants to go to uni, and Dante doesn't even want her to do that, but he just isn't someone who is capable of providing for a child, let alone her. But in the end, Dante launches a business called the Mobile Creche, like a mobile daycare, mobile kids center that is done in the back of a van. And they end up staying together, and she moves off to Manchester for uni. And this was a very big issue that I had with the show about the changing characters. But just one thing, they did do a flashback to that when they shared something about how Chloe was going to give away her pram and the baby clothes. The baby was also named Izzy, give away Izzy's old baby clothes. And I wish the show had thrown in one thing. Who knew that that mobile creche Dante created would have done so well? But of course, I don't think that actually happened. That must have been in my imagination. But there's another character that comes into play who's a very close friend of Dante and Chloe, and that is Janice Bryant. When I was just watching Season 10, Episode 20, the final episode, somebody posted in the comments section that the longest-serving character was Grant Lee Budgeon, the Mr. Curmudgeon of the series, but still has a good heart. Tom Clarkson was the second longest-serving character, and the third one was Janice Bryant, who was more or less the school's cheerleader, literally in one episode, but Janice was a character who was a student, and she left the series for a while and then came back later on. I believe it's in season 6, but don't quote me on that. And then you can see that Janice is a character who grew up on the show more or less, but I was so glad when she came back because I thought that she was just that. She's the show's cheerleader. Janice Bryant, I thought, was there to represent the impressionable youth, because they even show about how she's a teenager, but she's still very passionate about dinosaurs, which is something that a lot of kids do, but in a very early age, like at the ages of 5 and 6 and 7. That's like when I had my dinosaur phase, and we had all kinds of dinosaur books. Janice began with something like that. I don't remember her at all from season 1, actually, as I said, 15 years ago. But with Janice, she goes on to do a lot of reckless things, such as running off with an older teacher and going to a hotel with him, as well as just developing somewhat of a not exactly, I guess you just say a troublemaker relationship with another character named Maxine Barlow, who is a deviant in her own right, but is trying to get her life together and to sort things out. But when I say the impressionable youth, in many episodes, Janice would just go whatever way the wind was blowing. She talks about dinosaurs and how she likes them, then some guy comes to the school and is talking about young Earth creationism, and then she goes along with that. And as I said, she was persuaded to go to the hotel by an older supply teacher. And the problem is, though, they did an episode once when Janice went to a nursing home, and she's trying to bond with the older residents of the nursing home, and she's dancing with one of them, and the old woman falls over, and then they're lecturing her on like how, okay, you're trying to do things that are fun, but somebody got hurt, and then the woman says it's the most fun she's had in years, and that's another characteristic of impressionable youth. Like they also wanted to show that Janice has spirit and her heart is in the right place, and that she actually cares about people. Yes, she's immature, and yes, she isn't very responsible, but she is full of heart and full of enthusiasm. The problem is that once she comes back in, what was it, season 6 or maybe even 7 later on in the series, she comes back and she is pregnant with some unknown man's baby. I mean, I think she said it was dark outside and she had some sherry to drink, so she has no idea who the father of her baby is, and her baby would go on to be named Cheryl. For a while, the baby was known as Poppy because of an attempted adoption from one of the other teachers, Ruby Fry, and her husband. They could name the baby Poppy, but then Janice insisted on raising the baby herself. And then you could see Janice grows up to be a single mother, but becomes very irresponsible. And one of the other characters, Daniel Chalk, aka Chalky, calls her out on it, just like you're giving her cold pizza for breakfast 3 times a week or whatever it is. And there's even an episode when Cheryl develops a rash and Janice decides to just cover it with makeup. And I felt that to be very saddening because all of those life lessons, all of those moments when they're trying to show that, okay, yeah, Janice is not always thinking things through, but she has a good heart. I felt that they weren't they weren't capitalized, or maybe it's dealing with the sad, bitter reality that she grew up to be an irresponsible adult. She was an irresponsible kid, and then she grew up to be an irresponsible adult, and that was the saddening thing. I also noticed that the older Janice got, the less intelligible she became, and maybe it's more like inaudible is the right word. I'm an American from the great state of West Virginia, so it's a little bit difficult for me to catch all of the British humor, and I'll say something about that later on, but the older Janice got, like, I could tell that she's saying funny things because people in the comments were writing about how, oh, it was so funny when Janice said this or that, and I just couldn't follow along. It just all turned into mumbles. And someone actually did point out, though, I can only assume, hey, somebody from the UK wrote in the comments section that Janice actually has the accent from Essex, not from Northern England. I would not be the person to confirm or deny that. But to talk about another one of the very long-serving characters, there is Grantley Budgeon. I have one memory of him from season 1. I believe there was a character who was a very flamboyant child who was involved with the musical. I'm not sure his name, but Lewis Seddon, not Lewis Sutton, even shoved his head in a toilet once. And this character is being bullied. This character is being bullied, and he is approached by Grantley Budgeon, who tells him just to stop being such a sissy and a little girly boy or something like that, and then they wouldn't bother you. That's the only memory I have of him. I can only expect that that actually did indeed happen. But yet, that memory was so vivid. Like, the first time I saw Grantley in season 2, I knew exactly who that character was, and but he would go on to develop something very interesting in the show. When he was, as I said, a curmudgeon, he's a very grumpy old man at school. But one thing that I thought was a very big saving grace was that they introduced Grantley's wife, whose name was Fleur. And he would see that Grantley is very grumpy and unfriendly at school, but he was just gentle and kind and extremely loving to his wife, Fleur, who would then go on to develop early onset Alzheimer's, and Grantley would stay with her every night and then just spend hours with her, as he said, spending hours with someone who wouldn't recognize him. And you learned that there were different sides of Grantley's personality, and this would be recreated in season 9 when he talks about putting on that show so that people don't so people don't underestimate you or push you around, something to that effect. And he really made a very good attempt to get back into the spirit of teaching, because Grantley was somewhat of, I hate to say it, but an incompetent teacher. I thought that they were going to establish his character as someone who was an extremely boring and mean teacher, but also had very good control of his students. But you would see throughout the entire series that that would waver. Sometimes he would lose control, and the student named Finn Sharkey completely intimidated him into submission, and Finn even told him to grow a pair. But then this led to just learning about Grantley as actually a very sensitive and gentle character, as well as having his own flaws, particularly his gambling debts. And one of the biggest trademarks of Grantley Budgeon is that he reads the Racing Post, and I had no idea what that was. I had to Google it, and I actually ended up getting on their Instagram. It's a daily periodical that talks about horse races. That was good to know. But yes, Grantley would also be one of the characters to meet an untimely death, and I was very surprised that he was the one who stayed the longest, considering how grumpy he was throughout the series. But speaking of long-reigning characters, there is one that is named Tom Clarkson. As I said, Grantley stayed the longest. I think it was season 9, episode 6, when Grantley passed away. I was watching that somewhat recently. But Tom Clarkson was another character who stayed until season 8, episode 30. That's one that I will not forget. And as I said, he's first involved with this love triangle involving Izzy Redpath and Lorna Clarkson, also known as Lorna Dickey, as she refers to herself in season 2. I just have to throw in this one interjection that as a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old, and as an adult in my 30s now, I had such a different perception of that, because while I didn't remember Izzy at all, I do remember very clearly seeing that Tom is leaving Lorna to be with Izzy, but I thought Lorna Dickey was so much more attractive as a 17-year-old. I was like, I mean, I guess he has the right to leave her, but there are other things than just looks. I thought that she was like an absolute knockout, but now that I'm in my 30s, I began to see that Izzy Redpath was very attractive in her own right. And I was like, it's really weird how your perception can kind of change as you get a little bit older. Tom Clarkson would go on to become perhaps the most well-loved character in the entire series. And after that love triangle ends, there's a big reason why. It's because he becomes the person who, I think it was one of the head teachers said, he fostered half the school. He brought in so many students into his home, starting with Mika Granger and Chloe Granger, but there was this very odd dynamic that was going on between Tom and Chloe. And I brought up how they're both involved with love triangles. I do think that is just the nature of the show, primetime soap, right? But there's a very bizarre scene that's also rather well done when you can tell that Tom is a foster dad to both Mika and Chloe, but he seems to have a much greater attraction to Chloe Granger. I mean attraction in like the father-daughter sense, or he prefers Chloe over Mika. He definitely showed a certain amount of passion and care toward Mika, and I always notice that. Like, yeah, he definitely is. He doesn't dislike her. He definitely shows respect to her, but just not in the same ways. And there are a lot of highs and lows that Tom and Chloe experience, but there's one scene where they're in the back of that van, which is the Chloe's Cuts van, which will later be the Mobile Crush van, and they just hug, they embrace, and then they pull back, and then Tom and Chloe look at each other in the eyes, almost like it's just like the dreamy-eyed look that lovers get, and you almost think that they're about to kiss, but then they just give each other a hug again, and I think that that is very telling of the underlying elements of the show, and that's why I tuned into it so frequently. It was because of so many aspects like that. Like, it's multi-layered. So many TV shows out there are just one-dimensional. Okay, you have these characters that are the same way all the time, and there's no underlying structure. Whereas I said Dante was very passionate about Chloe, but he was also very ambitious. Tom Clarkson is very passionate about saving everyone, but he also has his own flaws, and he also has his own explorations throughout the gray area of life. Tom Clarkson would continue to expand throughout the series after Mika and Chloe went away to university. Mika left, I forget if it was one season before Chloe or 2 seasons, and I definitely noticed that she was gone, but her lover, Brett Aspinall, I didn't even know that he was gone until the 4th episode of that season. I was like, oh yeah, I guess he's not there anymore. I guess that shows how likable he was. But Tom Clarkson would also get a chance to bond with his biological son, Josh. Somebody's putting up these posters around the school, and we don't know who it is, or we don't know what it's about. But then you see that it's actually a boy named Josh who says that Tom Clarkson is his biological father. And Tom remembered Josh's mother, and he said that they were even together, but she used protection. And this would later go on to bring on the absolute best moment in the history of television. I don't care what it is or what you're thinking about, but the best moment is when Tom tells Josh, "You weren't an accident. Your mother stole my sperm." And I just remember, I just had to play that thing back 2 or 3 times, and I was like, did they really just say that on television? But Josh would have a falling out with his rather bizarre and quirky mother, and she would never be seen again, to the best of my knowledge. But Tom and Josh would develop a father-son relationship where he would move in with them, and they would also explore some things, such as Josh's coming out as gay. And that was another very challenging episode because Tom is lecturing Josh on how he needs to accept people who are different. Then he finds out that Josh is gay. So then he's like, well, it's different when it's in your own family, something like that. And rather shocking, but I was really surprised that they took that turn in the series because everything leading up to that indicates that Josh is just going to go on dating girls, and he's showing a lot of interest in other female students, particularly one named Lauren. What was Lauren's last name? Was it Lauren Andrews? And Lauren is a character who has a very large birthmark on her back, and they did an absolutely tragic episode about her when it was just so saddening because she has a birthmark and she's so ashamed of it. She tries to hide it, but then her changing room gets knocked down. The walls of it got knocked down, and it's exposed to everyone in the gymnasium, and she just absolutely panics. And I also noticed with Waterloo Road, much more so than many other shows, that they would cover subjects that were very real, that people would definitely experience, like lots of teen shows and primetime soaps will deal with things like anxiety or depression, or later we would see with Josh and schizophrenia, but like somebody has a birthmark that they're trying to hide from people, and like what are the challenges associated with that? It's something that a lot of people would genuinely experience and genuinely be concerned about. But with the addition of characters like Lauren, or as I briefly mentioned, Finn Sharkey, you had this instance in Waterloo Road, or you had this experience rather than an instance when you watch the show, you fall in love with it, you get very used to the way that the characters act, and then all of a sudden, one day, they're gone. Like, you become so accustomed to watching this show, and then the next season it's totally different. They're bringing in new characters, they're taking out old characters, and the by the end of the show, as I said, none of the original cast members were there, and the show isn't even set in England, it's set in Scotland. A very different it's a completely different series altogether, but I'm glad that in the final episode they were able to bring back some memories from the past, so you would remember the characters like Tom and Grantley and Chloe. But at one point, they introduce a delinquent, problematic family named the Kellys. And the Kellys would include Rose Kelly, the mother, and her children. I don't even know how many is it, 5? Marley, Earl, Sambuca, Prince, and Denzel. Of course, Denzel wasn't the youngest. Prince was the youngest. He was the baby. And Denzel was the younger brother to Marley, Sambuca, and Earl. And Earl Kelly would be a character who is just absolutely not psychopathic or sociopathic, but just a very troubled youth, and he was a very manipulative and vicious individual. During his first day at the school, he pulls a gun on two students named Bolton and Paul, and he is someone who comes from, well, a hard criminal family. I think they're trying to show that Rose Kelly made lots of bad life choices. She was an alcoholic, and she made some bad decisions with men. At the same time, she had a son named Marley, who was the oldest, who was definitely trying to be the voice of reason. He's trying to be the responsible one, but he's also being almost too sensitive and definitely susceptible to the manipulations of somebody like Earl. Earl would go on to commit one of the biggest crimes in the series when he would develop a relationship with Maxine Barlow. Somebody was talking about her in the comment section at the end of season 10, episode 20, saying how much they missed Max. And I was like, Max, who's Max? Oh, Maxine Barlow, of course. For one season, though, she's just glued to Janice Bryant, and they're like best friends. I mean, they are best friends for the majority of her time on the show, but they're just these two troublemakers that are bouncing around. And Maxine Barlow also has a relationship with Louis Sutton. She also gives birth to a baby and buries it in the schoolyard, and they dug it up rather easily during an expedition for fossils or something like that. That was a rather disturbing episode just because of how nonchalant everybody was. But Maxine would go on to live with a teacher named Steph Haydock. And Steph Haydock was the French teacher who didn't speak French that well. She was definitely a longer serving character, and one of the more likable ones because you could understand her flaws, you could comprehend how she's trying to make it in life, and maybe she was also a little bit immature in her youth, and she grew up to be somewhat of a uncertain adult. She was just uncertain about many things, uncertain about the direction of her life, even though she was much older. Then you had, because of Maxine's troubles, she ends up living with Steph Haydock, and then she develops this relationship with Earl Kelly. And Earl's deviant behavior just begins to escalate more and more. She is banned from Maxine is banned from seeing Earl, and the deviant behavior, the not wanting to be told what to do, just gets out of control. And one day, Earl pulls a gun and shoots Maxine Barlow, killing her. And that's one of the most heartbreaking episodes, but maybe not the most heartbreaking one. We'll get to that. And then it definitely altered the lives of Steph Haydock and Janice Bryant. And I just wished that they would have done some type of memorial or tribute, even when Janice is like moving on to Scotland and so on, that they would have had some type of connection to Maxine. Like she would go back on maybe the anniversary of her death, and her and Steph Haydock would meet up, and then they would just do a memorial for Maxine, and said even though she's irresponsible, she would never forget that. That is something that I would have liked to have seen in the show. But the Kelly family would remain using different cast members. They would Rose would get over her alcoholism. Marley would develop a relationship with a girl named Flick. Sometimes Felicity, I think, was her name, and her father was very jealous and controlling, and also knew how to operate construction equipment very well, even under the influence of alcohol. After drinking 12 beers, he can still drive an excavator rather well. That was kind of odd. But then you saw that that family would leave its mark, particularly through the characters of Sambuca and Denzel. And Sam, as she is referred to many times, is she the middle child? I guess you would have Marley, Earl, and Sambuca would have been the middle child. But she developed a strong relationship with Tom Clarkson, as well as another problematic boy named Finn Sharkey, but definitely not as problematic as Earl Kelly. Earl goes to jail and is most likely sent there for the rest of his life, definitely there for the rest of the series, and we don't see him coming out. But Sam would be a very lovable character. She goes from being the misunderstood delinquent of the family to having a big transformation. She becomes a good student. She is involved with certain problematic issues, gray area stuff. The Spanish teacher, Miss Montoya, gives her $20 to buy drugs, but in a sting operation nonetheless. And she develops friendships with a lot of people. She's fairly sociable, but that all changes when they learn that Sam has a brain tumor, and it's not in the final episode. I think it was the one before the last, like nine, season 9, season 10, episode 19 or something like that. When somebody else has a cancer scare, they say, "Well, you're not the first person at Waterloo Road who has had a big experience with cancer." And I began to think, well, now who on earth could that be? I couldn't even get it, but they brought up her name, Sambuca Kelly. And Sam would eventually pass away from cancer, but they had this very odd relationship going on with her mother, Rose Kelly, and Tom Clarkson, the who was also her favorite teacher. But at that point, Tom is acting as a father figure to Sam, as he does for many other students, but he's acting as a father figure, but he wasn't in a romantic relationship with Rose Kelly anymore. They had their stint together, Rose's life was improving, and when Sambuca passed away from the cancerous brain tumor, you could see that Tom was even more reluctant to give up the fight. He was still trying to find cancer treatments for her, even though her mother, Rose Kelly, had accepted that Sambuca was going to pass away. And I believe Sam passes away with Tom and her mother present. They fall asleep in bed together, and she doesn't wake up. Another very saddening moment, but from that point onward, Rose Kelly began to fade into the background, and the sole member of the Kelly family that was left behind was Denzel Kelly, who developed some friendships with people, and he's like seen as a friend to Phoenix and Jody Allen, who comes later on. But Denzel Kelly would just be always the one that was neglected a little bit. He even said that he loved having Tom Clarkson as a dad, and in one of the few episodes that I watched twice, only because I had it downloaded on my phone and I was just somewhere waiting, and I decided to watch an episode of Waterloo Road, and it's because anyway, there's a big scene in it where Denzel Kelly is shocking himself with electricity to draw a crowd, and you can really see that he wants attention, and he says very clearly, because his mother visits Earl in prison more than she spends time with him, his mother talks more about the youngest child, Prince, rather than him, and he feels neglected by his mother. But he definitely liked having Tom Clarkson around, because he said once Sambuca passes away, Tom Clarkson is acting like a father to him, but he won't be there anymore. And they had this very saddening scene that was right next to Sambuca's death, when you can see Denzel Kelly and his brother Prince are just seated outside the door, and Denzel's leaning against the door holding his baby brother, and it was just like that Denzel was always a little bit neglected. Denzel Kelly would go on to pass away in a rather, I don't know if it's one of the lousier cliffhangers out there, but at the end of season 7, which was a 30-episode season nonetheless, they're just going to Scotland to look at a new school location. They're going to give a tour of the building, and this truck just comes out of nowhere driving toward the students and the teachers, and it would end up leading to the death of Denzel Kelly and paralyzing another student named Tariq Siddiqui, who we haven't mentioned yet. But at the funeral for Denzel Kelly, Tom Clarkson simply says, well, not a funeral, but a memorial service. He just says, oh, you know how great he was. You don't need to hear it from me. And I was just thinking, Tom always neglected Denzel to be, I mean, I know these are fictional characters, but on that note, so many people were saying in the comments section, I watched all of this on the Waterloo Road YouTube channel, as well as Watch Waterloo Road I think is the name of the other YouTube channel that has uploaded a lot of the episodes, but it's all here on YouTube. A lot of people were saying in the comments section, poor Rose, I know these are fictional characters, but Earl Kelly is in jail, Sambuca died from cancer, Denzel Kelly got hit by a truck, and I was like, yeah, it definitely seems like a larger-than-life story, and we didn't really hear too much about what happened to Marley and Prince afterward, and as I said, they did mention Sambuca Kelly later on, but after Denzel passed away, they really didn't want to have him compete with his sister for, who got more press after they died and such. That really was Denzel's moment, so to speak. And I think even in the school in Scotland, they had a poster of Denzel Kelly on the wall. But I mentioned that Sambuca was involved with buying drugs in a sting operation, and she got the money from Miss Montoya. Oh, I think her name was Francesca Montoya, but everybody called her Cheska. Not Jessica, but Cheska. But it always sounded like they were saying Jessica to me. Miss Montoya was the Spanish teacher, and she was almost a breath of fresh air from Steph Haydock, who was the French teacher, who couldn't speak French that well, because Miss Montoya was from Spain, but when it came to her behavior and the way she acted, I think there was a big similarity between Steph Haydock and Cheska Montoya, and that was that they were both still very much connected to immaturity, uncertainty, and Miss Montoya was a younger teacher, much younger than Steph Haydock, but she definitely had lots of, I guess you would say, bad judgments, where she didn't completely think things through and she was impulsive. She would be one of those characters who doesn't come across as mean or malicious, but then she didn't show the proper course of action with many things, particularly with an affair that she has with a pupil named Jonah Kirby. And you gotta think, like, as I said, that's one of the few episodes that I watched more than once because I had it downloaded on my phone using YouTube Premium. They were supposed to wait one more day to hide their affair. And on the last day at like 2:36 p.m. or whenever it was, they get outed and they learn that Cheska Montoya is having an affair with Jonah Kirby, and they actually end up running away together to Scotland. I had never heard of this place before. Green something, Garden Green. It's on the border of Scotland and England. I guess people go there for weddings because in Scotland you only have to be 17 to get married. I think that was all new stuff for me, but that name was mentioned a few times. This place where the wedding chapel is, especially in seasons 8 and 9. So there was a very odd dynamic that was going on between Jonah Kirby and Cheska Montoya. Everything you were meant to think was Jonah is somebody who is very well ahead of his years. He's wise beyond his years. He's much more mature. And Cheska is, of course, a little bit immature, so it balances it out. And what they were trying to do was to show that, is she actually just using him and manipulating him? Is she actually taking advantage of him? Or are they actually in love? And they go on to get married, and I can only expect that that would mean that Cheska is going to spend maybe 6 months, 9 months, a year in prison or something, and then she would get out, and then they would just be married, continue on their lives, maybe get divorced in 5 years or something. But that was the last we saw of Jonah Kirby and Cheska Montoya. When it comes to addressing the subject, a certain student named Vicky McDonald calls out Miss Montoya very clearly by saying that she's just taking advantage of Jonah. She needs to just admit that she's using him, and she refuses to because she says that she's in love. I found that Vicky McDonald was a character that was very difficult to like. I knew that I was supposed to like her, but it was hard because one thing that Waterloo Road would do is they would recreate storylines from the past. They would reuse certain storylines over the seasons. And Vicky McDonald would be in a relationship with a student named Ronan Burley, and it was a very big recreation of Dante and Chloe. Ronan was an ambitious individual he sells kids like drinks and snacks. He's always trying to make money, and I think they were trying to show that, okay, this is the guy with a bunch of wild business ideas, but he's actually good at it. Oh, and here in America, we don't use this term. They say fruit and veg, like Ronan went on to run his own fruit and veg business, in addition to being like the captain of the rugby team. Horribly, horribly unrealistic. Absolutely, TV shows are unrealistic. Like, somebody's running a business. He's also the captain of the rugby team, let alone training for rugby, yet somehow has the time to do schoolwork. It's absolutely, no one would be able to actually balance all of that and do it well. I mean, running like a business and so on. But Ronan was a provider. He asked Vicky McDonald to marry him the same way Dante and Chloe wanted to get married, and Vicky also was unfaithful to Ronan, cheating on him with a student named Aiden. it's a very similar storyline. They move in together, they have an apartment, he wants to give her a home. But I think the only difference is that Ronan was very successful with his business ideas, and that Dante Charles was not so much, but we don't know about that mobile crash. I found that Ronan and Vicky were a much less likable version of Dante and Chloe, because both Ronan and Vicky, like, I don't know if it's like just the actors themselves or the way that the story was meant to be written. They both seem like they have a scowl on their face. They both seem like they're unhappy about something. And we talk about the lover-provider dynamic. Well, there's even a scene when Vicky starts beating Ronan up. She just starts hitting him, and later on, like, they have like a discussion, and then Ronan just flinches and jumps back, and she's like, "I'm not gonna hit you." They're showing that Ronan is actually the reliable provider, and he's like the strong supportive one, and then Vicky is retaliating against that in a couple ways. But we always have to remember that Vicky came from a place of loss, a place of neglect, and just hardship and tragedy. She was living with her father, but he passed away. She ended up in a homeless shelter, and that's no excuse for wrongdoing on her part, because Ronan also came from a family of criminals, but he tried to get out of it and break the cycle. And people always have conscious awareness. They have the conscious choice to choose, I'm not going to do this, or yes, I am going to do this. And they can decide to be in control of themselves, and it's their responsibility to control their behaviors. But I think that season was just a little bit less likable because of how blatantly it resembled seasons 2, 3, and 4, particularly 3 and 4 with Dante and Chloe. One character on Waterloo Road that I haven't talked about a lot yet, but only briefly mentioned, was named Finn Sharkey, and he also came from a background of neglect, much more neglect than Vicky McDonald. She was more about loss, hardship, and tragedy. Finn was almost exclusively neglect, lack of bonding with his parents, and he began to act out in a very deviant way, particularly toward a science teacher slash deputy head named Chris. Finn was a person who very clearly had a bad relationship with his parents. They didn't spend time with him. They wanted to move the family to America when not thinking about how it would affect him at all. And I have to tell you, part of me thinks Finn looks like a teddy bear, and a bigger part of me thinks that Finn looks like a teddy bear that you just want to punch in the face, and I can't even tell you why. But Finn, of course, was the delinquent during that season. He was in a relationship with Amy Porter, who was another problematic student that we haven't mentioned a lot yet, because that's really all you can say about Amy Porter. She was a nuisance. She was troublesome. She always did bad things. She developed a few real relationships with other students, but other than that, she was mostly a background character, a wallflower, so to speak, with the occasional outburst. But then after that relationship falls apart, there's an episode where we can see that Finn and Amy are involved with some type of suicide pact, and they're going to run into the ocean. I wasn't completely sure how it was going to go down. I think they were supposed to ingest some type of drug or something like that and run into the ocean, and they were going to pass away, but Chris is able to stop him. Finn would go on to be used in numerous storylines. He becomes the best friend to Josh, even though he's a terrible best friend. They actually had something in season 7 that was so accurate, where it was such an honest portrayal of how bad friendships operate. Josh is just sitting down, he reads something on his phone, he says, oh, you have to read this. And then Finn's just like, yeah, and he walks away. I mean, that is such a realistic way about of the unfairness that you experience in high school friendships. And then Finn would go on to be involved with another female student after the passing of Sambuca Kelly, and her name would be Trudy Siddiqui. And they have a lot of obstacles that overcome. First, when he meets Trudy, she is wearing a hijab like El Khaimar, and then she takes that off, and she decides to only wear the hijab at home around her father. She starts just becoming a little bit more extroverted, and definitely warms up to Finn, even to the point where she gets pregnant by him, but has a miscarriage. And I could only imagine that the show chose to do that because they always talk about how controlling and overpowering their father was, and I was like, well, how on earth would Trudy be able to have the baby and still maintain any type of a happy ending or something like that. It's just going to end in not only tragedy but also misery if their strict Muslim father is going to find out that she got pregnant by Finn Sharkey all the same. So Trudy had two siblings named Tariq Siddiqui, whom we said was later paralyzed in the bus and truck accident, and another sister named Nas. And they would be all pulled into the world around Finn Sharkey. That particular season was showing the introduction of Tariq Siddiqui, who was someone who came from lockup. I guess it was some form of juvenile hall, juvenile detention. I'm not sure exactly what they would the term that they use in the United Kingdom. And Tariq was again a troubled youth. He learned how to defend himself in prison, learned jujitsu, but he would always call his family every day, crying about how harsh it was in there. So he's brought back to Waterloo Road, and he was just learning about all the struggles of reintegrating into normal, ordinary, mainstream life. And the whole season has this feud between Finn Sharkey and Tariq Siddiqui. But they all had learned life lessons, and Finn actually does something very dangerous when he gets involved in a rival gang and throws something to the equivalent of a Molotov cocktail into a building where Nash, the sister of Trudy, is, and the building catches on fire, but he's able to rescue her, and throughout the other episodes he's just saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," just at odd times. That is also something that's very realistic that young people do, that I particularly noticed. Overall, I can't say that I liked Finn. I found that he was very difficult to accept because, I mean, he was somewhat of a spoiled rich kid, and the only thing that was wrong in the early parts was that, well, his parents didn't pay attention to him, so he would create trouble for the other people who were around him, particularly the teacher Chris, who was trying to bond with him. But everyone else was trying to move on with their lives, and he's holding people back. He's an unfair friend to Josh. He's very full of himself. And this also introduced another character named Kyle Stack, who was, I think his first appearance is in the Karen Fisher term, and he actually unleashes a vicious dog in the school trying to go after Karen Fisher's daughter, whose name is Bex. Bex, well, this is a very big storyline in the show, and the Fisher family is going through a divorce. Karen and her husband are separating because he's moving in to be with another family, and she had two children, and the oldest daughter was Jessica, and the her son. It's a shame that I can't remember his name because he was always the guy that people neglected or didn't pay attention to. He developed an eating disorder. Poor guy. He was a friend of Sambuca Kelly for a while, but of course I didn't remember his name. But sorry about that, dude. Anyway, they were a family that became one of the new headmasters, and they have this one scene where they have this daughter named Bex who disappeared, and she's a missing person for a long time, and then she comes back, and they found out that she was actually doing variants of pornography over the course of the time when she was gone. I mean, she's trying to reintegrate herself into normal daily life and also encountering those struggles. And a student named Kyle Stack unleashes a dog on her, and that's actually the thing that starts the affair between Miss Montoya and Jonah Kirby. He's just giving her a hug so tightly to save her from the vicious dog, and they're thinking that, or it's a foreshadowing to the relationship that is coming, and it's obvious that they are setting the grounds for a teacher-student affair. Kyle Stack was an interesting character in himself. So first, he's an absolute delinquent. He's an absolute problematic individual, but he becomes a close friend of Denzel Kelly. And then they do this audition for a show called Cinderfella, and Kyle just runs up the wall, does like a couple backflips, and you see that, wow, that actor must be really good at a lot of things, and we're only seeing him as this um, like guy who keeps his head down. What would you say in British English? A skanky looking fellow. We only see that dark side of Kyle Stack. But later on, especially in season 7, he would develop some gang related activities. He would also lose his home and end up living in a car, which was really the hollowed out shell of a car. But Kyle was what I thought was to represent. At the time, I thought he was meant to represent the person that you couldn't save. After all these efforts, all the second chances, he was meant to represent the person that you couldn't save because he just gets carried away with the gang activities. He fires a crossbow in the school, nearly kills somebody, and this would be brought back later on in Season 8. However, at that time, I thought that he was just meant to be the person who will not make it, that at some point you're not going to be able to save everyone, contrary to the desires of somebody like Tom Clarkson. But in terms of students that you could not save or could not properly be saved, there was one named Bolton Smiley who has been all throughout seasons, I want to say 4, 5, and 6 mostly. I think Bolton had left by season 7. Bolton is a very athletic student. He was the boyfriend of Sambuca Kelly for a while. He was also a boxer. I think he said he was district champ when he returned in season 8. But they actually have a very courageous scene. I think it's at the end of series 4 when like the school is burning to the ground. And then Bolton is trapped inside a room with some other students, and he goes to the doorway and he uses a piece of metal to pull off the door lock in a rather ingenious way. Bolton was also the best friend of a character named Paul, and he was someone who was like I said, very popular because of his athletic abilities. A lot of girls wanted to be with him, and he was involved with a lot of sporting events as he's a big center of attention. Bolton would later go on to join the army and get sent to Afghanistan, and he would come back and deal with some post-traumatic stress issues, and he actually runs away from the military, goes AWOL more or less. He ends up in Waterloo Road by the time they're in Scotland, and he's trying to talk to Tom Clarkson about something, and this is another big problem with the show. It's the same issue with Janice Bryant, who is an ex-girlfriend of Bolton Smiley, but it's the same problem. All those life lessons, all those episodes when you see, oh wow, yeah, he acts like a meathead, but he actually has intelligence and he actually has a good heart. Well, he ended up becoming an irresponsible adult. Irresponsible kid becomes an irresponsible adult. After going AWOL from the army and having a loaded gun in the school, Bolton is taken into military custody, and they weren't even sure what his exact punishment might be. It was possible they sent him back to Afghanistan or not, but I think there are some Waterloo Road mini episodes, like reunions, that would explain more about that. But also, you saw a very touching scene in that one between Grantley Budgeon and Bolton Smiley, when Grantley spends the entire day giving Bolton a hard time, being mean to him. Bolton approaches Grantley with open arms, metaphorically speaking, and then Grantley is just like putting him down for being a soldier, but then he explains that he remembers the names of every single student that he had that was lost in combat, and he's just very much opposed to war and how it affects people, and the toll that it takes on the families and the loved ones of those who are lost in combat. And I think that continues to the I guess you'd say the creation of Grantley's character. He comes across as very rough and mean and unfriendly, but he's actually very gentle and loving on the inside. But that episode was a little bit hard to watch. So, even though I'm going all over the map, from season 7, episode 30, there's the conclusion, and I said it ends with the odd cliffhanger. There's this truck that is just driving toward the students as they get off their school bus on the way to Scotland. But that's just it. The school moves from England to Scotland, and they have all new characters coming on board. They have a new location, and the only 2 original characters that stayed into Scotland, I believe, were Janice Bryant, Grantley Budgeon, and Tom Clarkson. And Janice would leave very early on, so really it's just Tom Clarkson and Grantley Budgeon are left, and Grantley actually needed a kidney transplant, and Tom sits down with him and just says, you and me, we're all that's left of Waterloo Road. And I thought about that so many times when I was like, those are the only 2 characters. And that's something that's hard to watch. Like, when the characters are always changing, you feel so situated with the with the school and with the students and the teachers, and they feel almost like family, and then one season later, they're gone. Now, the school moves to Scotland, and Michael Byrne is still the headmaster, someone who was involved with a rather important but very subtle storyline of how he was stabbed by a teenager, and then that guy was found not guilty of the crime, and then that guy just comes on continuing with some deviant, problematic behaviors, and they have this one scene where Michael Byrne is trying to get some empathy out of him, and the guy just breaks down crying, and you think that he has a knife in his pocket. He confesses to stabbing Michael Byrne even though he was found not guilty, and he pulls out what's in his pocket, and it's actually a photo of his daughter, and I thought that was meant to represent that not everybody is pure evil. But as they would go into Scotland, you would see the development of a lot of characters, particularly one named Daniel Chalk, whom we haven't mentioned too much, also known as Chalky. There's even one scene when Chalk, the math teacher, introduces himself to somebody saying, "Hi, I'm Mr. Chalk," and then they say Chalky, almost thinking like he didn't like the nickname too much, but he still had to wear it as a badge of honor, so to speak. Daniel Chalk was someone who was viewed as a very large man with very low self-esteem, or he wasn't the best teacher. He was very good at math, very knowledgeable, also very good at playing the guitar, but not the best at controlling the students, and definitely not the best at finding love in his life. You could also see that Daniel Chalk was somebody who wasn't the best at getting respect out of people, and he would resort to a lot of unhealthy habits, particularly comfort eating. In the beginning of the time in Scotland, Daniel is still chasing after Janice Bryant, and has this kind of on again, off again flirtation with her. But there's a scene like in the times in England when they're trying to arrange a wedding for Janice, and Chalky is saying that he's going to stand in for Janice's father, and he's so cheerful about it. And I think that the message that we're supposed to take away from that is that he doesn't mind playing any role in her life. He doesn't mind being Janice's father figure. He doesn't mind being her boyfriend or her husband, or even the babysitter for Cheryl, as long as that he had some type of interaction. And Janice would later on call him out on this, but Chalky would be a character that was really struggling to find lots of love, and you learned that he was the victim of some very intense abuse. Not sexual abuse, but more about physical abuse, being beaten with belts and burned with cigarettes a lot as a kid, and he actually changed his name to get away from that type of issues in his past. But his, I guess you'd say, gentle and submissive tendencies really boiled over once he began to call out Janice for some of the mistreatment that she did to her daughter Cheryl. As I said, giving her cold pizza 3 days a week and covering up her rash with makeup. It was Chalky who called her out on that, saying that she's a very irresponsible mother. And at first nothing happens, but then later on, Janice says, "Well, you're just a lonely old man who will never amount to anything and will never have a family of your own," meaning that he's just using them. And Chalky, of course, responds by saying, "I wouldn't even want to be in your family." So they have some very intense relationships, and you could see that perhaps the characters have a big understanding of how the relationship is actually going, and at a certain point they were just honest with themselves that Chalky is accepting all of these things, like being Janice's 24-hour babysitter, only because he doesn't have anyone else in his life, and it's very, very saddening. And I think that overall Chalky was somewhat of a saddening character until he meets an individual named Kevin Chalk, who is, as you can tell, will go on to be his adoptive son. Janice actually leaves the show, but I believe she's moving to Spain to be with her mother in Ibiza or something like that. But that is the course of many different episodes. There was one scene, though, when Chalky goes to the hospital because he's trying to impress Janice by exercising a lot, and he overdoes it and overexerts himself. And it was perhaps one of the most well-done scenes in terms of honesty in the entire series. Like, Chalky's in the hospital, and he says, he asks Janice if he can take her out sometime, and she says that, oh, maybe if I were a bit older, meaning no, but she says she would visit him tomorrow, and then she says, I wouldn't miss it for the world. But you can see when she turns to leave, her expression goes from being cheerful to just being very, what's the word? Almost like sad, downturned, crestfallen. Her expression completely changes, and in terms of subtlety, that was one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. But as I said, Janice would leave, as well as taking Cheryl with her, and then, Chalky would develop a very strong relationship with his foster son, Kevin Chalk, whom he would later, I don't remember if they're formally adopted, but Kevin definitely changes his last name to Chalk. They have a very rocky relationship to start out, because one thing that was brought up at the beginning of Kevin's arrival is that Kevin is a super genius, not just a genius, but a super genius. He can do all the problems in the calculus book even before the lesson has been taught to him. He knows the material perhaps better than the teachers. He's just hiding it. He develops a lot of deviant tendencies and doing lots of bad things, but then almost immediately, like after several episodes, his destructive behavior fades away, and then he is moved on to a period of well, just trying to make friends and trying to fit in and trying to bond with other people. But the relationship with Kevin and Chalky starts out very rough. At first, Chalky's looking very forward to having a foster son like Kevin, but then when Kevin moves in, he's just not he's not taking a very long time to bond with him. And then there's this one scene where they're sitting by like the waterfront and they're eating pizza, and Chalky says, "Are you gonna eat that?" And then Kevin says, "I don't see a survivor when I look at you. I see a fat man comfort eating. You're a damaged man who needs more taken care of than I do." Something to that effect, I'm paraphrasing. And that also showed a very rough scene. But then when Kevin learned about all the abuse that Chalky experienced, he began to feel better for him, and their relationship healed really quickly. And even when Chalky would come back in season 9, you could see very clearly that they were bonding very well, and then they were on absolutely good terms. But there was something else that really changes in season 8. Because they're in Scotland, while they were in Scotland, they introduced many new characters, particularly Connor Mulgrew and Imogen Stewart. Connor had a mother named Christine, who was an alcoholic, and she would try to hide it in glass. She would use all these tactics to try and hide her alcoholism, and it took a very hard toll on Connor's mental state and his well-being, and he would resort to solving his problems with destructive behavior. Not even solving them, just that was his destructive outlet. Arson, setting fires, and he would assemble things together and just set them on fire. It's almost just wallowing in the destructive tendencies. Connor had a girlfriend named Imogen Stewart, and one time he started a fire and he was watching it burn, and then there was an explosion and the ball of fire hit Imogen in the face, leaving her permanently scarred. And I don't know if they kept up with this in season 9. For some reason, I want to say, like, I was trying to pay attention, maybe just watching the show on YouTube, you couldn't see too well. I don't know if they kept up with the fact that Imogen was supposed to have been permanently scarred. They also didn't talk a lot about the fact that Imogen is deaf, or I guess we can say that because she's talking about the narrative. She is deaf, and she wears hearing aids to hear everything. And when they would do their own wedding ceremony later on, Connor would do his vows in sign language, and it really was adorable. But they had such an up and down relationship because Connor started the fire that left her permanently scarred, that wouldn't tell her why, and he wouldn't share a lot of what was going on. Then when she actually finds out she never wants to see him again, then she wants him back, and then they decide to get married. And you can see that's another recreation of what happened with Dante and Chloe, and then Ronan and Vicky, and then Connor and Imogen. It's this element of drama that they would like to use about how they want to just have the same storyline repeated for a newer generation or a newer group of kids. Well, Connor and Imogen were fairly well suited for each other after all of those destructive tendencies were laid away, where they were definitely both very likable characters. They definitely didn't have the same charm that Dante and Chloe did, and this was a clear time when I'm just wondering, why on earth are these two getting married? I know that they're passionate about each other, and I know they're trying to overcome this enormous obstacle of how he put her in the hospital because of his fire. It's important to remember that Connor didn't intentionally try to burn Imogen. He started the fire and he was watching it burn, and she tried to pull him away from it. But she was, of course, got the worst of it. Now, after the their marriage takes place, Christine is already in a relationship with the head teacher, Michael Byrne, and she got over her alcoholism for a while, and part of it was due to the watchful eye of somebody named Audrey McFall. Audrey was a character who had somewhat of a double-sided personality. On the one hand, she definitely came across as a do-gooder, someone who's just no nonsense, trying to do things in the name of goodness, and then in the name of fairness. She sees Grantley Budgeon doing something that is unjust, and she accuses him directly of doing that, of conspiring with the teacher from Havelock High. But then you also see that Audrey is somebody who pushes her nose into other people's business, sticks her nose where things doesn't belong, and throughout the later parts of season 10 you could see very clearly that Audrey was capitalizing on the revolutionary politics of the 1960s. She even says that it's 1968 all over again. And this is something else that is very consistent with many teachers. They have a certain connection to their youth that they're not trying to give up, perhaps because they're spending a lot of time around young people. But Audrey would also go on to be a supportive character. Christine would overcome her alcoholism. She would go on to become head teacher herself. She would go back to drinking. She would give up the head teacher's job, and then she would end up living with Audrey. And even though I didn't learn about that because of a spoiler that someone had written in the comments section, I thought that they could have done a lot more with that, or showing Audrey and Christine living together. However, it was almost always just talked to as an illusion. They really had gravitated in a different way. In season 8, though, there was the introduction of a new problematic set of people, and they're no more to do with the Kellys because, as we said, Denzel passed away, Sambuca passed away, Marley had graduated, Prince was too young for high school, and Earl was in prison. We now had the Berries, led by Barry. What a terrible name. But yes, Barry starts out the show by doing something very nasty to another student named Jack. First, she has sex with Jack's mother, which isn't the most evil thing in the world, but what is the most evil thing in the world is he videotaped it and played the video in front of the entire school. And Jack was really trying not to assault Barry or to beat him up, but he threatens to punch him, he threatens to hit him with a baseball bat, and he is really trying to hold back destructive tendencies. And also, I think it was trying to show that Jack isn't a bad person, but Barry is pushing his limits. I mean, people on Waterloo Road forget about things instantly. Like, that's just never mentioned again. Like, they had this episode, and I know it's a TV show and it's not real, but he played a video of him having sex with somebody's mom in front of the entire school, and just, oh yeah, by tomorrow it's all forgotten about. Or better yet, by the afternoon it's all forgotten about. Well, we have a rugby team today and you're on the rugby team, so let's just focus on that. Oh, okay. But I think that was meant to show that Jack was a person of very strong moral character, and that he even stood by his mother even after she had been with one of his classmates. So the Barry family would be involved with numerous storylines throughout seasons 8 and 9. You had Dynasty Barry, who would go on to become a close friend of Imogen Stewart, who was a troublemaker. I think they have one scene where she works in a strip club, but I forget if that was her or someone else or her mother. or something, but she is on track to be a problematic, deviant, delinquent, and future criminal. But Dynasty gets involved with her coursework. She starts working with a plan to become a police officer. She develops a relationship with Kevin Chalk, which is like an absolute odd couple when you had someone from a very troubled past. Well, Kevin comes from a troubled past too, and this was brought out on a thing called the Julian Noble Show when they saw Kevin's birth mother who put him into the system because well, they just really showed that she was very emotionally abusive and she didn't really have her life together and she was projecting all of her destructive tendencies onto him. And what was the name of Dynasty's mother? Was it Carol Berry? She is someone who would go on to first, she's very warm and accepting of Kevin, and then they have seen times when she likes Kevin and when she doesn't like Kevin, but she seems to be someone who is encouraging a lot of the destructive behaviors associated with her family. She's definitely not discouraging them, even if Barry's actions are very bad. She can often turn a blind eye to them, or she's a troublemaker and a criminal in her own right, doing her own aspects of this. Then they have one character named Casey Barry, who is the youngest. And for a while, Casey believes that she is transgender. She wants to be known as Robbie. Then she realizes that that wasn't really her, it's just a phase. For the longest time, Casey is very passionate about soccer, but then she takes up boxing training with Nikki Boston, another teacher there, and who I believe is head teacher for one day. But with Nikki Boston and Casey Barry, it is very similar again to the storyline used by Bolton Smiley, and he was training with a teacher named Rob, I think his name was. Rob and Jasmine Qureshi were the ones who were involved with that because there's Bolton Smiley was supposed to win a very important boxing match, but then they found out that Rob had given him some type of supplement, which he insisted was not a steroid, but it was perhaps some type of it was either an illegal substance or it was a steroid imitator, and it turned out to be very controversial. But the person who actually thwarted that one was Davina Shackleton. And I'll say some more things about her later on, but with the Barry family, Casey goes on to take up boxing, and she's supposed to train in America, but Barry steals her money, and then they learn that Barry is a very two-faced individual. He is very calculating, and you don't quite know where his loyalties are. But this also goes to show another aspect of how, yes, they're trying to save everyone. Michael Byrne is talking about the PRU, which is a place for troubled children, and how he's meant to just have this plan to try and help people like Barry. Well, in season 9, Barry gets even worse with his criminal behaviors. He goes on to be involved with human trafficking. You see him driving different types of cars, you see him driving a white van, and turns out the van is filled with women. In Dynasty, Barry actually turns him over because I think that was meant to show transformation, and Barry was looking at some hard time for being an accessory to human trafficking. So I think that that just goes to show you, number one, you can't save everyone, but also that a lot of the efforts that they're putting in were not very good because everybody is talking about how we need to help people like Barry. Well, they did try to help him, and his destructive behavior got even worse. I think one of the saving grace moments for Barry was that there was a student introduced in season 9 named Gabriella Walk. And Gabriella was the heiress to a fashion empire. Her parents were very wealthy, but they also had a very dark family secret that comes out very early on. And normally a show will not reveal something like that until the final episode. But they show that Gabriella had a sister who passed away, and the family blamed Gabriella for that. She says, "I've forgiven myself, it's you who won't forgive me." And you would see that that's the source of Gabriella's problems, quite similar to what happened with Finn Sharkey, except for the story of the dead sibling. And I found that Gabriella Walk was so much more likable than Finn Sharkey because you knew where the problems were coming from, and you could also, there's just something so entertaining about her not being a sociopath. I think Nikki Boston even referred to her as a sociopath, But looking at how she put on the facade of being a sociopath, and like even when she's up to no good, it's still entertaining to watch. Like she like flattens Mr. Reed's motorcycle tire, and she says, "There's something about small acts of deviant violence that, or small acts of vandalism that is so utterly satisfying." And Barry's like, "I love the way you talk," and I was like, "Yeah, I do too." Because she's not real. I mean, I would never want to go to school with somebody who's going to be acting like a sociopath, especially when they're not, and doing small acts of petty vandalism. But on television, it was very entertaining. But over time, you find out that, yes, okay, Gabriella is troubled, but that is no excuse for her behavior. And this is really epitomized when she breaks Casey's arm by kicking her off of a climbing wall, and Casey misses the Commonwealth Games. And that could have been a pathway for her into the Olympics, or definitely making her and an Olympic hopeful. Gabriella was a student that was not well liked by many. She starts a big rivalry with Dynasty Barry, and the saving grace, though, for Barry was that it showed that he actually wanted a relationship with her. Even though he's involved with human trafficking, even though he's a criminal, he actually wanted a relationship with Gabriella Walk to show her that he cared about her, or he was trying to do something right in his life. He's trying to do nice things for her, taking her to a high-end restaurant, and he wanted to just have good experiences with her, and she was just saying she's just using him because she is out of his league and he's just a nobody, and she is not a sociopath, but pretending to be a sociopath. And Gabriella would have a big transformation in season 10, but this would all be to very little avail at first, because everyone remembers her mean streak and they do very mean things to her. But at a certain point, Gabriella and Casey are able to make amends, so to speak. Now, with other characters that are there along the way, there's one that I haven't mentioned yet named Jody Allen, who is a protege of Chris, so to speak, or Chris and Matt. He was the music teacher, right? The music and drama teacher. His name was Matt. He was there in series 3, but he comes back on later in, I guess, series 6. And Jody Allen bonds well with him. Well, now they had this thing for a while that Jody Allen only wanted to be referred to as Scout, but she only did that sometimes, and I thought that they really missed a good opportunity there. Firstly, I didn't like the nickname Scout, Jody Scout Allen at all. I thought they should have given her a better nickname, and that all of her friends should have used it all the time, and that people should have addressed her. They could have done more with that, and one of the big problems is Jody Allen starts out as a drug runner, or someone who holds drugs for the dealers because they don't search kids, let alone younger girls. And she has like this short red hair, and she was very messy, and she had a very mean mother, and who was very selfish. But then you see that in the next season they've dyed her hair, or maybe went back to normal, and now she has blonde hair, and they made such a hard effort to make her look like Sambuca Kelly that I thought it was almost unfair. And many times I would think that I was watching Sambuca Kelly when Jody Allen was on the screen. I really did not bond well with her. Like, I didn't seem to be too impressed with her character. They could have done so much more with Jody Allen, but they also did explore some other real life issues, like when she moves to Scotland and she's living in the schoolhouse. The teacher, Nikki Boston, takes a very strong disliking to her, and she even accuses her of things that she didn't do, and you can see that there's genuine dislike that is turning into a whole host of problematic issues. But as far as Jody Allen in Scotland, she lives in the house, what is it called? The schoolhouse that's run by Grantley Budgeon and the later on Mrs. Budgeon. Oh, what was her first name? It wasn't Gracie, was it? But Mrs. Budgeon. She Maggie Budgeon. Like, they get married after the passing of Fleur. Fleur, as I said, had early onset Alzheimer's, but she does get her memory back for a little bit and says goodbye to Grantley, and then Grantley goes on to marry Maggie, and she becomes Maggie Budgeon, and the two of them are running the schoolhouse together. And then there's a new student there named Rhiannon Salt, who was present at Rochdale, like when they were back in England, because we only know this because she remembers some of the other students. Maybe she was a character then, but I don't remember her from England. She was definitely in the schoolhouse in Scotland, and she did a lot of very nasty things to Jodie Allen, including urinating in her bed. And you would think like people just get over things so easily on the show, and Rhiannon would be another character that has a big transformation, and she becomes a much larger player throughout seasons 9 and 10. And firstly, she develops a close friendship with Imogen Stewart and Dynasty Barry, but you can see that Rhiannon is often the victim of pranks and people take advantage of her, particularly a student named Darren Hughes, who firstly receives a naked photo of Rhiannon, or what we expect to be naked. We don't see the photo of it, but Rhiannon sends the photo to Darren, then Darren gives it to Barry, who sends it to the entire school, and then she's humiliated, but of course she get over with it. She gets over it, excuse me. Then later on in the series, Darren is also caught taking a photo of Rhiannon's skirt, and then he didn't learn anything from the previous lesson. Yet for some reason, Darren and Rhiannon end up being in a very long relationship. They become very passionate about each other, and Rhiannon has a big pregnancy scare, but then she realizes that she is not pregnant, and she still chooses to stand by Darren Hughes. In season 10, season 10, I think is when it starts, they introduce a new head teacher named Vaughn Fitzgerald, who has two sons named Leo and Justin, as well as some other characters such as Kenzie and Scott. Like, Kenzie and Scott have some history that we don't know about at first, but they're just insulting each other back and forth. And Justin is the new problematic individual. Vaughn is trying to start a new life with his children, well, with his stepchildren, that is. One of them is named Tiff. And oh, what's the name of the guy? He had the big red hair. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but it'll come to me later on. But Justin is an absolutely problematic individual. He is rude. He is unwilling to cooperate. He views the father as someone who abandoned the family, and the only reason they're moving in together is so that their mother can go to a mental institution / rest home. More like a rest home, really. Their mother, Olga, that is. And it takes a big toll on Justin and Leo. Throughout season 10, you saw a lot of Justin's deviant behavior, but then you're meant to learn that he isn't such a bad person. And later on, though, I mean, I think some of that might have even happened in season 9, not too sure. But what happens is Justin develops a very odd relationship with his stepsister, Tiff, even though their parents are only dating. They aren't officially stepsister and stepbrother, but they start sleeping together. They become boyfriend and girlfriend unofficially, but Justin's mean streak really takes over, and he becomes very controlling, and he tries to run away with Tiff, I think to London, but the plan is thwarted by Tiff because she texts her mother to just come get her, and he's unable to go through with it. And Justin's mean and problematic behaviors do not cease there. I found that one thing that was very honest about the show is Justin Fitzgerald was perhaps one of the best examples of how a teenager actually manipulates people. Like, he's talking to Christine Mulgrew, and he's just all like, well, okay, I learned my lesson. All right, I understand you. And he's just putting up this act when he's talking in a gentle way, and then she's like, oh, well, he's not a bad kid. I'm just going to give him a pass. And you could see this very clearly with another student that I mentioned, Imogen Stewart, when she is breaking lots of rules, like having her phone out in class, and but they let her get away with it because, once again, they think that she's not a bad kid, and they even want to participate in some of these shenanigans themselves with her. So it also goes to show you how when people have these preconceived ideas, they turn a blind eye to some people, and they also turn a very dark and sinister eye toward other people. But eventually, the the situation is smoothed over in Justin's family because Tiff and that red-haired stepbrother of his move out, and as well as their mother, the art teacher, they end up separating, and we aren't sure if she's going to get back together. I mean, Vaughn Fitzgerald and his wife Olga, as long as Justin and Leo. Leo was a very troubled kid who experienced a lot of, not exactly neglect, just unfulfilled desire, but he retaliated in a very bad way. When he didn't get to go out with the girl that he wanted, he started sending her nasty texts in an encoded way, in short, cyberbullying her. And he also developed a very nasty streak when he would try to do things for attention, but when it wouldn't work, he would try to do things for almost like notoriety, hacking into a company's database, like Kevin Schalk could do it. But when Leo Fitzgerald tried, he made several critical mistakes. And I think that was meant to show that, yeah, Leo is smart, but he's not like extremely smart, so he's always a little bit insecure about things. He seems to have no real friends, and he develops an addiction to online gaming and talking to what we can perceive to be women, but they might have actually been bots, because it was the only escape that he had from just everybody thinking that he was inferior. Of course, I mean, why doesn't he try and improve his life as opposed to just sitting around and blaming other people? I mean, those are things that I had to learn firsthand, the hard way. But a lot of the concepts in Waterloo Road are epitomized by something that a character named Davina Shackleton once said when she was talking about a student named Carla Bentham who had Asperger's syndrome, and she was saying that she spent every day with her, and that was Davina's job for a while. After she was the school secretary, she was pretty much just the aide and assistant to Carla Bentham, and she's talking to Tom Clarkson, and she said that, okay, we don't have to get attached to everyone. I was with Carla every day. We help them, and then we move on. Meaning that Tom Clarkson handled the situations very differently, and I think that that was a big thing that happened in Waterloo Road. They're trying to explore, like, well, how attached should the teachers be to their students, where somebody like Tom Clarkson was just going after everybody. He's trying to save everyone. Somebody even wrote that in the comments section on YouTube. They're like, every episode of Waterloo Road in 5 words. Tom Clarkson to the rescue. You can sum it all up in 5 words. Tom Clarkson to the rescue. And he wants to save everyone. But I think that the show has somewhat of an intentional debate that it creates within you, because Davina Shackleton is making those claims about Carla Bentham because she didn't want a relationship from her. I mean, it's not only because Carla had Asperger's, but it's because, I mean, when I say she had Asperger's, meaning that Davina would not develop a completely bonding relationship, it's also because Davina never wanted that type of relationship from Carla to begin with. She was there because of work, and Tom was supposed to be the stepfather to Mika and Chloe, and they have a very touching episode when there's a student named Stacy Appleyard who gets into Tom Clarkson's bed to try and seduce him, even though he's asleep, and Mika and Chloe know exactly what's going on, and then Stacy eventually tells the truth, and then Tom is like, I'm trying to smooth things over with Izzy Redpath, and then Mika and Chloe are on his side. They're like, hey, he didn't do anything wrong. He's a good person, and Izzy doesn't take well to that, but I found it very warm and touching to learn that Tom Clarkson was the foster father to Mika and Chloe, and he ended up staying with them after Izzy passed away. As I said, she was stabbed to death. I believe it's by the uncle of Lewis Sutton during like a fight in the parking lot involving Jack Rimmer and Lewis's uncle, who worked at a nearby snack bar. But when Tom Clarkson passed away, season 8, episode 30, I was warned to look out for it by people online, and I did. I have never really cried at a TV show, and I did not cry, but I was close. I was really close to crying, and it wasn't even the episode itself. It's just that character Kyle Stack comes back, and he is involved with a very big controversy, as he does, but he's standing on the roof about to jump off of the school building, and Tom comes up to save him, but as Tom is trying to help him down, he ends up falling himself, and he hits the ground, and he says, "It wasn't Kyle's fault." And the reason why I was so close to crying was just because Tom was such a beloved character, because he was such a well-liked character, and all of the stories that he was involved with all these people we've been talking about, whether it's Dante or Chloe or Mika or Brett Aspinall or Josh or Finn Sharkey, he bonded with so many of these students. And it's just like you're like looking at 8 seasons of television all at once, even though I didn't remember him from season 1. So 7 seasons of television all at once, and it all just gets blended together. And many people did give me a forewarning to that. They were just like, "I love you, Tom Clarkson. Why did you have to die in season 8, episode 30? And then shortly after that, Grantley passed away, and all of the characters from the original remaining cast were no longer there. One character, though, that I didn't mention yet was George Windsor, who actually turned out to be a very likable individual. And he is likable in the sense that he's not real and you don't have to deal with him, much like Gabriella Walk. But George Windsor was the Mandarin Chinese teacher who also taught French and German. And you learn that he doesn't actually speak Mandarin Chinese very well. He spent 9 years in Shanghai, and he ended up marrying a woman named Princess Windsor, lovely English name that she had. And you learn that he was actually having her mark his coursework and so on, and he was pretending to show off that he knew Mandarin Chinese, but he didn't. That was another recreation of how Steph Haydock didn't speak French that well, so she had to go to community center classes, and then or something like that. She had to go to like intensive language training, and then Christine Mulger says the same to George, that he has to go through intensive Mandarin training. I don't know what became of that. They might have just stopped the Mandarin initiative, and he's there for a while. And I was actually kind of saddened when he left, only because he was a lot like Grantley Budgeon. He was someone who had a very hard shell, but he wasn't pure evil. Although George Windsor did say very clearly that he was that way because of his relationship with his mother. She was stuck up, she was a snob, and then George grew up to be a stuck up and a snob and putting everybody down. He lost his marriage to Princess, but that one was also very well done, because it shows that Princess didn't leave him because she felt underappreciated in the marriage. Well, that was one reason, but the other reason was she just thought that the lifestyle they had was boring, and she wanted to do something else. And you learn that just because someone is in a vulnerable place, it doesn't mean that they are selfish, or just because she's not the person who's making all the decisions in the marriage, it doesn't mean that she isn't also doing things that are selfish. And she has her agenda too, and he had his. And she actually has a brief romantic affair with Kevin Chalk. They just shared a kiss in the kitchen once, but she was actually going to use him. He uses his money anyway to run away, and they were going to start an affair. Kevin is somewhat of a complicated personality, but I can't tell you a single favorite character that I had, or favorite episode, or anything of the sort, because there are just so many ways to appreciate television. I mean, maybe there were characters that I bonded with more than others, or there were ones that I were attracted to. And I think that Chloe Granger was the one that maybe I was most curious about. And Dante Charles might be the one that I appreciate the most. In addition to Tom Clarkson, he would definitely be out there. See, you can't choose just one. And there's certain aspects of the show that I also found very unsettling. Like, I think it's in the 3rd season when Jack Rimmer just leaves and Rachel Mason comes in. I just found that was like, what? Why is he leaving? And somebody new was coming in, and it took a long time to get comfortable with those types of decisions. But I also really wanted to just no, you can't really choose any favorite episodes. Although there is one scene in season 6, I think, when Lauren Andrews and Amy Porter are singing the song Total Eclipse of the Heart, and it's absolutely horrible, but it's so awesomely bad that, like, I just That's why I downloaded that one episode, really, just so I could watch them sing that song over and over again. If I had to choose a favorite moment from the show, other than the memorials for Tom Clarkson, it would be that right there. They're doing it for like either the talent show or the audition for the play Cinderfella. But it was just so goofy. It was absolutely amazing. Well, anyway, you've listened to my lengthy discussions, review, and everything associated with Waterloo Road seasons 1 through 10, although I didn't remember a lot of season 1. And at this time, I would like to talk about some of the characters as well as storylines that I did not like on the show Waterloo Road. In season 8, there was the introduction of a character named Lula, who was from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Lula Tasibi, Lula Tabisi, something like that. Yeah, whatever, right? But she was a very unlikable character, except for the first episode that she really had devoted to her. I think it's season 8, episode 2. It was definitely at the beginning of season 8. And Lula was a character that I thought was meant to represent someone who came from a harsh upbringing, so they created a harsh person. Major credit to the actress who played Lula, because you can see that she definitely brought a lot of the moments that are filled with rage, like, to life, and she just seemed like such an authentic performance. Like, definitely seems like someone who isn't necessarily putting on an act. It could be a very real person that you've met in your personal life, but no, I didn't like the character at all, because after that first episode in which Lula was featured, she became very self-serving, or also very negative towards many other people, or doing things in a mean way but still trying to self-justify it, particularly through her relationships with Harley, which is someone whom is her best friend, and they develop a short romance, but she was just calling him good boy and so on. Very controlling, but I think that was meant to show that she came from a harsh background and it turned her into a harsh personality, but still not very entertaining to watch. And as a character on television, even though she's somewhat realistic, she was not likable. The other character that I was very disappointed with was Sonia. After Janice Bryant leaves the show, Lorraine Donegan, the benefactor for the Waterloo Road School in Scotland, brought in her sister Sonia to be the school's Seka, and I thought that Sonia was just a cheap knockoff of Janice. Again, no disrespect to the actress, she gave a great performance, and if Janice hadn't been a character on Waterloo Road for so long, then it would have been a much more entertaining series to watch with the addition of Sonia, but she had almost an identical personality to Janice. I don't know if you guys use this word in the UK, but ditzy. Like, Janice is just a very ditzy adult. As a kid, as I said, she represents the impressionable youth, but then she grew up to be an irresponsible adult. Then they had Sonia, who is a very similar personality. She's all bubbly and such, and then she does things that are irresponsible, and much like, as I said about Lula, she can be very self-serving. With Sonia, she was someone who was filled with ambitions, recognized that her life did not go the way that she wanted, so she was trying to rebound in some ways. They have an episode in, is it season 9, maybe? Season 8 or season 9, where Lorraine's Lorraine's sister Sonia, talking about Sonia now, she starts a beauty business to impress her sister Lorraine, and it almost immediately goes south. Like, she sells tanning shots, which I didn't know were a thing. Like, you can inject yourself with tanning solution. She sells them to Rhiannon Salt, and then she has an allergic reaction, but Rhiannon recovers very quickly. Now, this is one when I gave credit to the show because they did something that was a little bit predictable, but they sped it up because it was predictable. Most shows would devote an entire 60-minute episode to just that concept of how Lorraine's sister Sonia, I'm thinking about Lorraine Donegan, Sonia, would have started the beauty business, it would have been going really well, and then the big twist at the end is totally predictable, and it turns out some of the products either aren't good or someone has an allergic reaction, and we get it. The moral of the story is Sonia is ambitious, but she's not extremely thoughtful, and she is not extremely responsible. But they condensed all of that into like maybe a 5 to 10 minute segment, and then the rest of the show was devoted to other things. And Waterloo Road can challenge some of the conventional expectations of television in that, yes, some things are a little bit predictable, and then they can add on just a little bit more thoughtfulness and just a little bit more of a humanizing element. And as I said, they told many real life stories. No, the school secretary starting a beauty business to impress her millionaire sister. I actually have one complaint about that Lorraine Donegan, who is the benefactor behind the show Waterloo Road in Scotland. Did I say the show? I meant the school. She's behind the school in Scotland, but I think though that for the amount of money that it must have taken to build that school, for some reason I think Lorraine Donegan would have just completely depleted her assets. I really don't want to say something that's incorrect now, but I think for some reason she had a net worth of less than £100 million, and you'd think that, I mean, just not only the building of the school, but the operations, paying the teachers' salaries, and just everything. I just don't really think that that would have actually worked out. But I may be wrong about that. As I said, just going off of memory with some of those points. But Sonia is almost able to rebound in season 10 when she develops a close friendship with Regé-Jean Page, who would go on to be the Duke of Hastings in Bridgerton. And in his earlier years, he was on Waterloo Road, playing the teacher known as Guy. Nice name, right? Yes, and Guy and Sonia actually end up living together for a while because he was someone who had, like, I know what it's called in America. I don't know what it's called in the UK, but it's like emergency certification. We even had a teacher like that in my high school where he didn't have an education degree. He just got emergency certified, like to get his teaching license, and then they just kept renewing the emergency certification over and over again. I also knew someone who had the next best thing, and that, like, again, this is all American, which is it's like you're a long-term substitute, but then they just bring him back every year. So for 8 years, he was, I guess, what they would call on Waterloo Road a supply teacher because he doesn't have an education degree. Once again, and he was teaching science, and then like one day he asked me, "Hey, do amino acids make proteins?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I think so." He's like, "Okay, good." Didn't want to mess that up, but I think you can get the idea there. With Guy though, he actually really turned to be a supportive character for Sonia because Sonia had a misunderstanding when she thought she had cancer. She went to the doctor, and the doctor revealed that the lump that was actually located near her armpit was benign. So, but she was just crying and going to Guy to console her, but he misunderstood and then reveals to the rest of the staff that Sonia had cancer. And instead of telling the truth, she was just so overwhelmed with emotion that she went along with it for a while and then very publicly said that she did not have cancer and caused a big fuss. But that's what happens with Sonia. Like, she's just a very unlikable character because she just has so many things that you would think, yeah, they wanted Janice Bryant to be doing that, but now they have a slightly older version of her who's also Lorraine Donegan's sister. And I wasn't very impressed because why not get a school secretary who is the sister of the benefactor and do something different? You don't have to make her just this ditzy, irresponsible character. I mean, maybe if they had like someone who had a completely different personality, a school secretary who was either cold, methodical, and calculating, similar to the way that Gabriella Walk would have behaved, or someone who is also very much like very ambitious and has absolutely brilliant insights and is almost running the school when no one is completely aware of it, or someone who just uses their intelligence for good. There's so many ways that they could have handled a character like Sonia, but instead they created this knockoff of Janice Bryant. I don't know if you guys who have watched the show remember this, but I think the character's name is Henry. He was the son of the phys ed teacher. He had red hair, and they have this one episode when he does a paternity test because he thinks his father isn't really his biological father. But he was trying to crack the password to Janice's computer, and the first word that he tried, like the password he thought Janice would have created, was pink, and that didn't work. So he tried Janice, and Janice isn't the password to get in. That's one of the better moments of the show. And finally, one of the characters that I also thought was not very likable at all, and this is purely by design, mind you, whereas Lula and Sonia, you're supposed to like them, but I did not, but an absolutely unlikable character on the show was Sue Spark, who later goes on to be Sue Losley. She is married to Simon Losley. For a while, he's the deputy head, and then for a while, he's also one of the teachers. But I think in just the last season, they knew that the show was ending, so they just got characters coming in and out. They took out George Windsor and they brought him back. But it's really a shame that the show ended when it did, because I thought they had a lot more room to explore and to explore a lot of new storylines. However, with Sue Spark, she starts out as being a science teacher, and she's not very good at it, and she's a former flight attendant, but her father didn't approve of that career, so she had a science qualification. I don't think they even provided too much of an explanation about that, about like how she had the science qualification. I mean, she must have spent a lot of time studying sciences in college or the universities, but I think that they kind of just glazed over that. Anyway, Sue was just someone who was very insecure Sue, right? But her name is Sue Spark, and she's a science teacher doing experiments, and that also is a little bit tacky. But Sue was a very tacky character. She's the son of a very wealthy individual. She's trying to marry Simon Losley, and in season 9, they had this whole story of how they are they're planning this extravagant wedding. Sue is behind most of the planning process, and then the wedding actually goes through, but then Sue and Simon decide to elope privately, and in just they get their marriage vows done away from the party. They tell everyone to keep celebrating and to go through with the party. But Sue develops an affection to a particular guy named Hector Reed, who is the phys ed teacher, and he is mostly a homewrecker. He starts out by trying to seduce Nikki Boston away from Sue Sparks' sister, and they have a relationship going on, and he is successful in doing so. But Hector is someone who is a player. He is someone who is a ladies' man. And as I said, he's a homewrecker. He goes after the women whom he believes are challenges, and then he starts going after Sue because she's married. At first they share a kiss, and then he's really trying to steal her from her husband, Simon, and it's a very young marriage, and that kiss turns into a full-blown affair. But there are many times when Sue says something to the effect of, "You only want me because you can't have me," but when the affair becomes public and it becomes known, and Simon leaves and he moves to Wales and he wrecks Hector's motorcycle and then drives off, well, now they have the opportunity to be in a relationship, and then Sue wants nothing to do with him. And it turns out that it's not that Hector wanted her because he couldn't have her. If anything, he tried to maintain a relationship with her. She was the one who wanted him because she couldn't have him. And that's why Sue Spark was just such an unlikable character, driven from like her own selfishness, but also treating people like toys. It's like, once you can play with this toy, okay, now I don't want it anymore. I want to do something else. It's like giving somebody what they want, and then 30 seconds to 1 minute later, they just don't want it anymore, because it's all about just being and going after something that you cannot have. And it's really not fair to say something with a person, but they are fictional characters all the same. This was something that was also very telling about I think it's more about how art imitates life. One of the reasons why Sue has the affair is because Simon has like a 5-year plan. He is somebody who is very not only ambitious, but he has a vision for the way he wants their future to be, and he's always making plans. But somebody like Hector, who is portrayed as exciting, and he is someone who is portrayed as just a very well, as I said, he's supposed to be the heartthrob, right? Or he has certain types of alpha male tendencies. He's attracting partners with excitement, and he, of course, is the very much into like physicality and so on. But then, as soon as Hector is in a relationship with Sonia, he starts reverting back to Simon's way of life. He starts making plans for them. He starts saying, "Hey, let's move to the French Alps and let's live in a chalet, or is the French Alps or the Swiss Alps or something like that." And then he's trying to do all of those things that Simon did that drove Sue away, and just that, like that, Sue Spark leaves him. So that was something that wasn't very easy to Well, I mean, there's absolutely nothing likable about Sue. She's just a very selfish character, but she's also just very confused, and I think that people do make confused humane decisions, let's say that. So lastly, I found that once the show was getting around to season 10, episode 18, I really thought that this show is not in any position to leave. And I think that's one thing that was really lacking from season 10. They didn't have like a very strong mystery that came to culmination. They have one character who I think was named Lorna, but it might be Lana. She looked an awful lot like Bex Fisher, who was the daughter of Karen Fisher, the head teacher at one season, and I almost thought that she was Bex just in disguise for a while. But yeah, she had a very controlling and almost a psychopathic husband or something like that, and he comes back into the picture for season 10 episodes, maybe 19 and 20, but that was a very boring, dark mystery and so on. I mean, they really could have done something a lot better for the final season. If it's going to be the final season of a show that's been on for 10 different series, then you could do something much more mysterious. You could have something that is going through the entirety of the season. It doesn't have to be something such as, oh, is there going to be a merger with Havelock High? That's your mega powerful storyline. Whatever. And also, they had this thing that was incorporated into season 10 where there's the addition of a new character named Abdul, who learns that he was actually adopted from Pakistan and that he was doing a project on genealogy to trace his family roots, and he thinks that his mother passed away from a genetic condition which he has inherited. But then his father reveals to him, okay, you were adopted. And he says at first he's born in the United Kingdom, then he was born in Pakistan, which is something that Abdul learned from stealing his own birth certificate out of a file cabinet. And he's reunited with his real mother, but I think that was meant to show that okay, his father didn't do everything by the book, or his adoptive father, I should say, but he was still not a completely evil person. They didn't go through all of the proper channels to adopt him, but they weren't trying to do anything malicious. They adopted him from an orphanage, and they did not know that he was actually a stolen baby. They thought that they were rescuing him from a terrible life of growing up in poverty, when in reality he was actually a missing person who had been more or less taken from his mother without her consent. But then they are reunited, and I felt that that was just something that was either a little bit rushed or is really approaching the end of the series. You're getting to the series finale, and I was just like, I want to see more of this. I mean, I just didn't feel that that was a very satisfying ending because if you're going to have a story like that, they could do two or three more different series, like, or at least one. If there were a series 11, like, well, what is the relationship with his father going to be like? Is he going to go back to Pakistan and have some type of tragedy, or is his mother also going to be hiding dark secrets? And they could have done so much more with that, but they were just bringing in characters and hurrying a lot of the storylines in the final episodes. However, I had a great time watching Waterloo Road. I watched it much later than other people, and I'm glad that I found the show and especially got back into it after taking a 15-year hiatus. I don't know if anyone's ever watched the show like that, but thank you for listening to my review of the entire series. And if you would like to weigh in the comments section, share anything you would like, please put your ideas in the comments section down below. Please feel free to visit some other episodes of Astro Psych 400 as well as Black Box Online Radio, and I'll be bouncing around on other channels like the Zodiac Killer channel, maybe Professor Dad. So there are lots of things going on, lots of ways to keep in touch, and please feel free to visit some links in the description box. Remember, being weird is not a crime. Okay, talk to you guys later.